Even in an AI-focused world, MacroEdge is in the business of focusing on you. We don't just understand our clients, we listen to what's said and illuminate on what's not. In a world moving at the speed of light, with shifting markets, evolving workforces, and non-stop disruption, MacroEdge helps you to navigate and identify novel opportunities, expand your enterprise, and succeed in tomorrow's world. And it all starts with you. Put your enterprise and your perspective in the driver's seat. We're in the business of you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to MacroEdge Radio. This is John Galt speaking. After our brief break from the holiday weekend, we are ready to rock and roll. And I have to tell you, we're going to start the program off with a quick bit of data while we're waiting on our guests to join us. I think all of you are looking forward to this. Calvin Froedge is going to join us tonight. Let's hit the market data first, since we skipped over it last week, and begin by reciting all of the craziness that we witnessed. Dow down 220, S&P down 20.58, NASDAQ down 7.301, Russell 2000 up 11.43. Volume was meh, if not absolutely ridiculous, and not really worth paying much attention to. And here we go. Our guest is getting ready to pop into the room with us. Gold up 33.42 to 36.40. Silver up 8.5 cents to 41.50. It did kiss $42 today. We also have WTI crude down 151 to 61.97. Brent down 139 to 65.60. 10 threes at 6 basis points. 2s, 10s at 57 basis points. Down a bit on the weakness in the employment data. The 2-year down 8 bips to 3.509%. 10-year down 10 bips to 4.07%. Fed cuts are definitely going to happen this year. And now, before I bring our guest on, I have to get this rant off my chest about what's happening today and the information that has been presented. As many of you know, we have had a change in some of our cabinet departments. The Department of Defense is now known as the Department of War. This morning, before the data was released, there was a delay warning from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. After this embarrassing delay was presented to Howard Lutnick, apparently they changed the name of the BLS to the Bureau of Delayed Statistics That Are Meaningless, or BDSM for short. Let's hit those numbers, because you got to beat yourself over the head or someone nearby to sit there and figure out just how ridiculous the situation is. We have non-farm payrolls up 22,000, private only 38, U3 at 432, U6 8.1 seasonally adjusted, 8.2 non-seasonally adjusted. So what? It was a revision disaster in June and July. The bigger number, 27 weeks plus unemployed, has jumped up to 1.938 million, or 25% of all people who are unemployed on a non-seasonally adjusted average. That should be a bit of a warning to everybody. That should be a major red flag to everybody. People who generally don't pay attention to change in the demographic and structural employment of the United States. That being said, we have to sit there and begin to address this. And we have to look how they're going to address this. What is happening now is we're doing the usual. We're throwing money at it. And there's this belief that a rate cut is going to solve all of the problems. A rate cut is just going to paper over the problem, and it's not going to have any kind of impact on what we're about to see, because the first rate cut will not have impact until 6 to 9 months down the road. And the only cure would be for a massive fiscal stimulus where the checks hit before Christmas. And this government is so incompetent and incapable, it's not about to happen. Calvin, can you hear me? I don't think he's gotten in here yet. I'm trying to bring him up and on the air so we can.
I can hear you.
Oh,
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure if it captured you because on my screen it didn't update, which is typical of this app sometimes. Welcome aboard to MacroEdge Radio. Calvin, why don't you fill everybody in a little bit about yourself to our new listeners, what you write about, what you discuss on there, because I think you and I have a lot of parallel ideas on where this thing is heading, and what you make of today's data for a starter, sir.
Well, I guess I could describe myself as a politically isolated economic dissident. I mostly write about what I think will make me money privately, but publicly, I guess I'm kind of a troll. So and I mix some truth in with the trolling, but yeah, I'm an investor, professional investor. I don't manage other people's money. I only manage my own money. I've been independent since I decided in 2019 I wanted to stop working for the man, wanted to stop doing consulting projects for other people, and just wanted to focus on sort of doing my own thing. So I've been in all sorts of different businesses, real estate, stocks, bonds, small brick and mortars, you name it. So that's I'm just kind of a eclectic everyman.
I appreciate that. I've done a little bit of everything myself, and now I'm on that downward slope because I'm nearing retirement age, whatever the hell that is. And I really am curious, despite my rant about the Bureau of Delayed Statistics that are meaningless, what do you make of what we're hearing? Where on one hand, we're saying, don't trust the employment data, but from the same department, the same groupings, we're supposed to trust the inflation data, the productivity data, the housing data, et cetera. It seems to me the lack of consistency and factual analysis coming out of not just our statistical providers, but also some of the private sector statistical providers makes it almost impossible for an investor to make a logical choice as to what course the economy is currently on.
I mean, I think BLS and ADP, they're both kind of trending in the same direction. And if everything was great, then I don't think that the federal government would be basically begging for rate cuts. So that, to me, that's the big inconsistency, is that on the one hand, the economy's never been stronger. On the other hand, it's too late, Powell.
What do you make of this confrontation with, regardless of the economic information we're seeing from the various departments, this conflict between the presidency and the Fed at this time? Because it has been a wide-ranging discussion. Daniel DiMartino Booth was on here a few weeks ago. We talked about this. I think it is a very dangerous concept for Trump to construct the Federal Reserve in a parallel, if not almost mirror image of what Nixon tried to do with Arthur Burns in the 1970s. What's your opinion on that?
I mean, look, we're going off a cliff fiscally, and I don't think it really matters who's at the Fed. You know, what's the, FOMC decision? What's the Fed rate? I mean, that really only matters for the rate that the banks are borrowing at, and what the Fed is paying to its member banks. Like, as far as the real economy goes, I mean, the bond market is really going to determine what rates are. So, the Federal Reserve can do whatever it wants, and short of basically outright consistent M2 creation, quantitative easing, I think it's clear to everybody, where this is headed. And if the Fed does take that route, well, you're kind of just killing the denominator. You're going, into Argentina mode. And so Argentina, here's a little interesting aside about Argentina. Like, I don't think people realize that a century ago, Argentina was actually a rich country. Okay, like Buenos Aires was, the Paris of the Americas. They had, nice streets, wide sidewalks, nice buildings. They were importing marble from Europe to build things with. They had streetcars before just about everybody else did. I mean, Buenos Aires was a phenomenal place. And they started going down that socialism route. And, by the 40s or 50s, it's kind of clear that, things have gone off the rails. By the 1980s, they're using aluminum coins. And if you've studied, numismatics and kind of monetary history at all, that like basically zinc and aluminum are kind of like scraping the bottom of the barrel as far as coinage goes, right? Like if you've ever held an aluminum coin, it's like it's not even there. I think a wood coin might be heavier than an aluminum coin. And so the crazy thing about Argentina is not only did they get so poor that they had to start using aluminum coinage, they got so poor they had to stop using aluminum coinage and not use coinage anymore at all. And since the 1980s, basically, longer than I've been alive, they have only been using paper currency. And now, Argentina is the kind of basket case where you walk into a bank and you say, I want to change currency. And they say, well, this is a bank. We don't do this. And you say, okay, well, can I open an account? And they say, well, do you work for the government? And you say, no. And they're like, well, why did you walk into a bank then? Right. So what we're on the road to doing is just, sort of perverting every meaning, perverting every incentive, and really creating a system that is completely alien and unrecognizable to anybody who grew up calling themselves an American. And that's structural. It's from, the top level to the bottom level. And I'm not just talking about, like people with purple hair and changed sex parts. I'm talking about a Congress that just seems addicted to spending, and every single year raises the deficits, raises the federal budget, raises the debt ceiling. We're running World War II level deficits right now in peacetime, in a time when supposedly there's no economic malaise. So if things really go off the rails, which I think they're in the process of doing, that's where we're at, right? We don't have any ammo. So then, the Fed can start cutting, the Fed can bring rates down, and that'll improve some interest rate sensitive industries. But it doesn't really change the path that we are on as a nation when you consider the size of our deficit. Especially with them, kind of cramming everything to the front end of the debt curve. It's just fiscal insanity, and it can only end in the abandonment of reserve currency status and really the long-term destruction of America's reputation on the world stage as a safe haven or even as a reliable counterparty.
Fascinating that you bring up Argentina, because a lot of people aren't as old as I am, and I appreciate that. But in 1982, they invaded the Falkland Islands as a distraction, as a war to seize, quote unquote, national territory that was due and belonged to them in the history of the country. And amazingly enough, we seem to be on that path right now. Now, by no means am I endorsing the idiot in Venezuela. That country's been destroyed just like Argentina. Venezuela was the paradise of Latin America up until the 1990s. It was a booming capitalist economy, followed the same path as Argentina. And here we are now getting involved in militaristic goals, threatening Venezuela, a country which militarily can't stand up to us by any stretch of the imagination. It seems like the use of war as distraction is part of that latter day phase as a society ignores what's going on, but we continue to sit there and promote ourselves as the greatest country in the world. So you have to use our currency, you have to invest in our markets, and you have to sustain our debt. It's a dangerous road we're on. You're spot on.
Yeah, I as far as Venezuela goes, I would point to the Chevron export licenses as maybe being the most relevant variable there as to why we're involved. The drug stuff, obviously, I'm not a fan of that, and I don't think that the idea of going militaristic against cartels is totally crazy. And I don't really have the intelligence as to what extent Venezuela is a narco state, but I do think it's highly coincidental that basically you've got one U.S. company with kind of a precarious oil export relationship, and we're kind of deeply involved in that. As far as whether or not Venezuela can stand up to us militarily, it's got about the population that Iraq did when we did Desert Storm. It's about twice as big geographically as Iraq. So it's not a tiny country, and it is a country that has it's not our military, of course, but it's not like they don't have a military. I mean, they've got a couple dozen F-16s and Su-30s, and they've got actually a pretty large amount of manpower, and lots of tanks. They've got drones. They've got they've got electronic warfare. They've been supplied by China, by Russia, but even by the United States. And what they have is enough to stop 4,000 Marines for sure. I mean, we've got, if you were going to go to war with Venezuela, when we did Operation Iraqi Freedom and when we did Desert Storm, those were huge operations that involved hundreds of thousands of U.S. personnel. I mean, in some ways, it was bigger than D-Day. It was bigger than Normandy. And so, if you're going to do war, you kind of have to go big or go home. So if we go into Venezuela, trying to just push somebody around and we half commit to it, I think it could turn into a Vietnam. I think that if you were going to go to war with Venezuela, one, you need to have a really solid justification for doing so. And two, you need to make sure that you're not going to get, a black eye doing it. I don't think it's as much of a cakewalk as people think it is. And I think that anybody in the intelligence community or in Congress and the Defense Department that assumes that it will be a cakewalk just because Venezuela is a socialist failed state. The climate's pretty rough. You got 30 million people and you got a lot of land with, a lot of geographic variation, a lot of rain during the rainy season, a lot of mosquito-borne illnesses. It's not like, going into Grenada where we took casualties. It's not like going into Panama where we took casualties. This is a relatively large country that's organized, that does have some military hardware. And if you're gonna go down that road, you better go all the way.
And the funny thing about Venezuela that most people don't know about is that almost all of their gold mining is in the southeast portion of the country, close to the disputed region with the Guyana, where there was a large oil discovery. But we won't talk about that because why would we want gold and oil? We have no track record of invading countries for that, right, Calvin?
Yeah, the Guyana thing, I mean, I think that Venezuela is definitely acting in an aggressive posture. Like, I'm not going to sit here and act like Venezuela is just some victim. Okay, I mean, they're
not even close.
Yeah, they're kind of a bad actor, and they've funded a lot of instability, social instability against capitalist governments in the region. So I'm not going to say that to any stretch that the Venezuelans are the good guys, but I also think it's really dumb to go pick a fight with them unless you're really prepared to see that fight through. I mean, there's been a lot of cases where we've tried to arm the Venezuelan rebels, and we've sent them, we've sent them guns, we've sent them even personnel. We've had some Navy SEALs get killed or captured, and it's been already kind of an egg on the face experience, just trying to do sort of the cloak and dagger sort of thing.
Well, I'm looking at the bigger picture here, and this is one of the reasons that I'm glad that you're on tonight, because from a big picture perspective, all of these distortions, distractions, and lack of faith and confidence in our ability to manage our own affairs, much less our financial affairs, seems to this esteemed radio host, to be an impetus to why gold is moving. It is the crisis insurance. And a lot of people are trying to use the old, well, it's inflation warning, it's inflation warning. It's also a political hedge. What is your take on the move we've seen in gold? Not in the last week, but in the last 2-3 years.
Well, from 1999, 2000 until 2020, gold went from what, $200 an ounce to almost $2,000 an ounce. Back in the 1960s, gold was still pegged at $35 an ounce. So I would not say that it's a new trend. Okay, gold has been appreciating. I think just not at the pace that some of the more impatient observers have been hoping for. I mean, the thing you got to remember is all this stuff takes a long time. When Rome collapsed, the 3rd century age of chaos, the Rome still existed. The Western Roman Empire still existed for almost 200 years after that, and it's it still existed in some form in pockets, and also in the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople, the Byzantines, for about 1,000 years after that. So things actually tend to change pretty slowly, for the most part. I mean, if you ask me what does America look like in 100 years, I would probably say, well, different than today, but people are probably still going to be speaking English. The culture probably still won't be that different, and the state capitals will probably be the same. Now, the federal government, will we stay together as a union? I don't know. I'm starting to doubt that. But I think that things kind of take a lot longer to happen than people really appreciate. I think this move in gold, it's partly fear driven. It's partly central banks kind of changing their policies. This whole thing where we essentially nationalized Russian sovereign debt that was sold to them, and we stole it from them, basically, right? And we said, oh well, they did this illegal invasion, so we're going to take their sovereign assets. Well, then the question becomes, okay, well, are you going to police everybody based on everything they do? What if you don't like some climate accord? What if you don't like some international vaccine regulation? You don't know how far it's going to go. So I think it's just kind of that for a while there, economic relationships were almost like holy, right? It's like you don't mess with a man's money, and that was sort of like a core tenet of our mercantilist economy. You could go to war and stuff over things, but you don't freeze somebody else's investments in your sovereign debt because you don't like something that they're doing domestically. And for Russia, I think Ukraine is sort of a domestic issue. I mean, it was part of Russia for most of its history. It was part of the Soviet Union up until about 30 years ago. Why are we involved, right? So I think that's kind of the bigger consideration for gold as a central bank is a central bank starts saying, okay, well, what's my counterparty risk here? Why would I take the risk on investing in this other country's sovereign debt when I see that they spend like drunken sailors? They've got this huge deficit, and by the way, if you do something that they don't like on your disputed border regions, they'll freeze your shit.
110% agree, sir. This entire concept of seizing other nations' financial assets denominated in the world reserve currency has actually, I think, terrified China to the point where they're just looking for any alternatives at this point in time. And while we're under this misconception because we're having it pounded in our heads that commerce flows through the United States, there's billions of other people in this world who do business every day and they don't transact in dollars. They don't transact through Chase Manhattan or any of the other major banks. They do their own thing. And we seem to have lost the concept of a global economy and economic independence, wanting to become, as you stated accurately, the Rome of the world.
Yeah, well, it's not just our, rivals and enemies that are getting a little skittish. I mean, Japan's basically been a U.S. colony for 80 years, and they're selling our bonds.
And do you blame them? You see the T-bill liquidations about every other night now. And most people are dismissing that as well. It's no big deal. But when you have T-bill liquidations and JP Morgan Chase loading up on $400 billion, Warren Buffett holding hundreds of billions in cash and T-bills mostly, you have to think that they know something inside our country, not to mention the Japanese, who are desperate to get rid of some of their dollar transacted and denominated debts for the long term.
Look, I think that was it the Charles Calamoris that penned fiscal dominance? Was he the one that came up with that term?
I believe so, sir. Yeah, I think you're correct.
Yeah. So he's got this fiscal dominance idea, and where he thinks it ends up is that essentially the Treasury, the administrative branch, executive branch of the United States, they're essentially going to start passing new legislation through that impacts the insurance industry, the banking industry, private wealth, and they're basically going to force these people to buy U.S. debt, because the issue is that they can't shrink the deficit when 90% of the deficit is entitlement programs that everybody's addicted to. And when I say entitlement programs, I'm not talking food stamps. I'm talking Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, right? Like that, that stuff plus defense is 90% of the budget. So you can't, those are sacred cows. You can't cut defense spending because Israel needs us. You can't cut Social Security because all the boomers paid in. And you can't cut Medicare, Medicaid because, well, that's just immoral. These people need help, right? Like they're sacred cows. So if foreigners aren't going to fund that anymore, and the reason that they wouldn't fund it is like, who do you know that was buying Argentine debt? Okay. Basically the IMF was doing bailouts. Okay. But other than that, nobody in their right mind was buying Argentine debt, because they know that by the, even if they do get paid back, by the time that instrument matures, the currency is worth zero, right? So if we're gonna continuously run these huge deficits, eventually the only way to fund it is going to be to force banks, insurers, private wealth managers, etc., to hold a portion of their assets in Treasury. So what Charles Calamoris thinks is going to happen is that essentially you're going to have this structurally embedded inflation, which is essentially the percentage that these major players are forced to hold in Treasuries to subsidize the ever-growing U.S. deficit. And they're not going to be able to get out of it. It's going to be a drag on their earnings, and it's going to be a constant drag on the U.S. dollar. So I think that's where this is this is headed long term. I actually do believe that the United States could turn the ship around if you had the right kind of leadership. But the problem is everybody is so short-sighted. Everything is on a 2-year, 4-year political cycle, and it's basically just whether it's Republican or Democrat. Get in, steal everything you can, because if you don't steal it, the other guy will. And, we need longer term thinking. I mean, most of the U.S. populace, honestly, is not informed or intelligent enough to even vote. Like, I'm not sure democracy is actually doing us, any favors. We need leadership that can basically say, look, we have these structural problems and they're fixable, they're addressable. But this is what we need to do. We need a plan. We need to implement that plan. It's going to take decades, but that's what it's going to take if we want to make sure that our children and grandchildren have better opportunities in life than we did. And until we have people in office and even in corporate positions who are willing to, make those sorts of long-term calculations on what's actually best for the economy, for the currency, for the country. We're gonna be in this, basically loot and bag mode forever until there's nothing left to loot.
And that's the sad part about it, is we have people willing to sell out for the next decade, knowing full well they'll have no responsibility or impact on their family, their buddies, their trading partners, etc., all for personal gain, and not understanding the long-term implications as you outlined. And this is the part what scares me about where we're at now. We're to the point at the Ponzi scheme where the government and certain members of the government and our financial institutions, it's not just the government, folks, are willing to sit there and change the math. Now, the math is the math. It's an established science. You can't change the math, but you can modify the outcomes from the math to create whatever you'd like. And that's what scares the hell out of me. The real math versus what they're trying to produce as a perception for the masses, the opiate that they need to get by and say everything is fine, is just as terrifying. The promotion of the lie. And I know you're an intelligent man.
Talking about CPI and hedonic adjustment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're willing to sit there and create new theoretical ideas. MMT, which is the most absurd thing I've ever read in my entire life. If you sit there and start promoting these ideas and selling it to the American public, is that this is the fact because we told you it's the facts, and they tell you have to invest based off of that, it really does introduce no cure to the long-term problems you're discussing.
Yeah, another guy that I like on here that I follow, he talks about how all the things that are bad for us have gotten cheaper, drugs, porn, etc., and all the things that are good for us, like organic food, clean water, have gotten more expensive.
Pretty much sums up why silver is over $40 an ounce. Let's touch on silver real quick. But first, let's do a commercial break for our guest, CalvinFroedge.com. That's CalvinFroedge.com. He writes a private content. It's a paid subscription service. Please take a visit to his website. Follow him on X. I highly recommend you take a look at it. It's at Calvin Froedge. And also MacroEdge.net/ozone, MacroEdge.net/ozone. 2-week free trial. Go there, subscribe today. See what else is new and exciting coming from the MacroEdge team. Calvin, I got to ask you, because I'm a long-term silver and gold bug. I made a lot of money back when I was a teenager in the 70s, early 80s, off the silver burst and the Hunt brothers. Who's our Hunt brothers this time?
David Bateman.
Interesting. I like a name right off the bat. Well, on a long-term picture, now that they've made it a strategic or critical metal, is that the hidden investing opportunity for us gold and silver bugs for the next year or two until we figure out some way to ban it or seize it for the government?
I mean, look, I tend to go into what everybody hates, and recently it seems like a lot of people like silver and gold, and that's got me a little bit skittish. But I'll tell you what's good about silver. So right now, retail demand for silver is absolutely terrible. All right, like if you talk to bullion dealers, you talk to pawn shop owners, etc., they'll tell you I can barely give away silver right now. There was a top 5 bullion dealer. I have a friend who works there, and he told me a few days ago that their sales in the month of August were the worst that they've been since the COVID lows. So the retail demand for silver is absolutely horrible right now. Everybody thinks it's going to crash. Everybody is afraid to own it. But on the other side, you have this industrial demand that has been really strong for a very long time, and is actually growing not linearly, but exponentially. And what's driving that is basically photovoltaics and batteries. So there are, some interesting metrics you can look at that kind of, tell you what industrial demand really is. Two interesting points are one, 1,000 ounce bars, kilogram bars, or sorry, 100 kilogram bars, like, anything that's big denomination. Those things are sort of disappearing, and that's what industry is using to do photovoltaics and batteries, etc. So if you look on the industrial side of things, we're actually consuming more silver than we're pulling out of mines every year. Now, there is a lot of recycling being done. There's a lot of silver still being melted. I'm talking sterling silverware. I'm talking old coinage. A lot of junk silver is getting melted down. But the most compelling part of the silver story to me is that industrial consumption. Now, when silver was at $20 an ounce, silver represented about 5% of the total cost structure of a PV installation. Now silver's doubled, so we're probably up to about 10%. Now in the 70s, you had sort of a similar backdrop in a lot of ways, where industrial consumption was rising, commercial inventories were falling, mine production had kind of faltered, but it did get to a point where the price no longer made sense. Okay, and basically the industrial users kind of went on strike. There's a book that was written, I believe, in 1980, which was the year that silver peaked. I don't think we've ever actually gone above the silver price in 1980 in nominal terms or inflation-adjusted terms. Maybe we'll hit it in the next year or so. But this book is called The Silver Mania by R.L. Streeter. So that's kind of an interesting book to read if you want to hear, if you want to know the story of silver kind of from the perspective of, he was an executive at basically an industrial silver consuming company, one of the biggest in the world. Like he was a Dutch film company or chemical company or something like that. But I would highly recommend that book if you want to kind of see it from the other side. So I think it's dangerous for people to basically get into total speculation mode and forget what are the fundamental drivers of this. I do think that that long term silver is going to make new highs. Silver is going to keep going higher, but I think it's really dangerous to oversell it. On the gold side, the interesting thing about gold is that we consume very little gold in the way that we consume silver. Like a lot of the silver that we're using, like we're putting it into again, solar cells, batteries. This stuff is basically supply that's tied up for anywhere from, let's say, 8 to 50 years in some sort of industrial application. But with gold, you dig it up out of the ground in one place, and then you make another hole and put your gold there, right? So what drives gold, it really isn't economic fundamentals at all. It's more this belief that humanity has had essentially in the entire history that anybody knows about, that gold is precious and money, and we just kind of have like this thing in our souls even that makes us want it. Okay. And so, it's been money for the entire 5,000 years of recorded history that, we can even say what money was. It'll probably be money for another 5,000 years. And it's not even, completely rational. It's just the way it is. But what's really driving gold prices, gold actually does have an embedded inflation rate, okay? Because most of the gold that's in existence, it doesn't get destroyed. It doesn't get put into some, long-term usage. It's not, industrial consumption. It gets dug up from one place. It gets put into a hole in the ground somewhere else. But the supply, the total supply of gold, tends to increase at about 2% a year. Okay, that's about how much we dig up. So the natural inflation rate, which is interesting that the Fed target, is 2%, because that's about the long run inflation rate with gold. If anybody is interested in kind of like the history behind gold and the characteristics of gold, there's another book that I'd recommend called The Golden Constant by Jastrom, and that has charts going back a very, very long time, and talks about how gold has performed in all sorts of economic environments and cycles. So that's a great one. Also, there's another book called Gold Bug, which is really interesting. But gold has very different properties than silver, and we don't accumulate gold because we're going to use it. We accumulate gold because it's in our nature to accumulate it. So all the central banks that are basically moving towards gold and away from other financial instruments, mainly sovereign debt, it's basically just playing towards human nature. It's a loss of faith in human systems and a return to faith in sort of original human greed.
Cannot disagree with anything you just said, sir, and I've well spoken. I don't want this hour to end without discussing your logistics ventures. That is my history and background before I decided to take it easy on my heart, soul, and brains. The trade war, the tariffs, and the impact on our logistics and supply chain has been off the charts obscene. And as you were talking about the debt, when I heard Lutnick bragging about bringing in $30 billion last month in tariff revenue, I had to laugh because that didn't even cover the interest on the national debt, much less the pace of accumulation of national debt on a daily basis, which is now over $1.47 billion. When you look at the big picture, and I'm just talking interest, I'm not talking about the debt itself, and you see the interruption to the logistics and supply chain, there's a lot of opportunity there because America is going to have to sit there and reconfigure how we ship and receive things around the world based on this global trade war, for lack of a better phrase. Where do you see the primary opportunity? I see it in getting back into shipbuilding, number one, and number two, improving our internal infrastructure. But neither of those are cheap, and it's going to take some seriously inspired private leadership to make that happen.
Yeah, so I think state, local, and federal level combined, we spend about 5% on infrastructure in the United States. And so that, that's everything from highways to subways to ports to ships. I think overall it's about 5%. And I think that, if you look at all of the great civilizations in history, what made them great was their ability to facilitate trade. And so to me, that is really the role of any level of government, whether it's state, local, or federal, is how do we facilitate safe trade, right? Like you don't want people getting robbed on the highway, right? You want good roads. You want sort of harmonized tariff systems. You want harmonized import-export rules. You want a system that makes sense. I mean, a lot of the world now, logistically, like there are certain countries where you basically just can't trade with them. It's structurally impossible to do trade with them unless you have an in with some government minister who makes it possible. And so that's sort of like, compartmentalization of the global economy. It doesn't make us richer, it makes us poorer. What makes us rich is, being able to produce something that lots of other people in different places in the world want. And so we can send them, what we make that we are best at, and they can send us what they make that they're best at. And, so it's sort of like a rising tide does lift all ships sort of things. And, the issue with the United States is relatively open or it has been for a long time as far as free trade goes. I think that this move towards tariffs is really kind of reversing that. And again, it reminds me of Argentina. Okay, if you go to Argentina, you fly into Argentina, they're going to want to search everything that you have. If you have clothes that still have a label on them, if you have 2 of any item, they're saying, why are you bringing this into our country to sell and take money out of our economy? Like that's the thinking. Like the thinking is that like anything that comes from outside is a threat. And in the reality is that, well, you actually need things from other places that other people make that you don't, that you can bring into your country and spread the wealth around, right? Like God forbid somebody's gonna come in and like sell us some some cheap batteries, right? Like who needs that? So I think that this this sort of like protectionism trend that we're seeing right now, I think that it's sort of an immune reaction to the fact that we have a huge trade imbalance. But I think that the real reason that we have a huge trade imbalance is because we have too many artificial forces that are impacting the market, impacting people's behavior. We don't have enough entrepreneurship. We don't have enough small businesses. Right before the Civil War, 99% of all Americans were employed either as sole proprietors or in small businesses. We didn't have big corporations. We had a lot of small traders and independent people. And when you start getting to, like large corporate levels, you start getting into monopolies. And what do monopolies want? Well, they want to have their monopoly. They don't want to have any, competition. They don't want to have other people selling competing products. But, what we need in the United States is not a bunch of, oligopolies, not a bunch of monopolies. We need lots of self-employed, independent people producing something of value that makes somebody else's life better. That is what made the United States great. And embracing that once again is what will make the United States great once again. I mean, the thing about the United States, the reason the British lost, the reason we kicked their fucking asses in the Revolutionary War was because you didn't have to train the Americans, okay? Like, these guys basically grew up, hunting and fishing, and they'd pick up a rifle and, practically independently organize and just go off and start picking off British soldiers. There was nobody to attack. It wasn't like you could just go fight one army and win the war. America was almost like a mycelial network, like a mushroom network. Mushrooms are amazing. You can have these mycelial networks that spread out all over the forest, so that when you step to the edge of the forest, there is actually an electronic awareness. There's an electrochemical signal that passes from the point that you step into the forest all throughout the forest, okay? Like, mushrooms are fascinating. Mycelial networks are fascinating. And that's what the United States was in the Revolutionary War days. We were a bunch of independent craftsmen, thinkers, scientists, planters that basically, when the need arose, we all came to the occasion. And that's why nobody could beat us. In World War II, the German officers wrote about the qualitative superiority of the American soldier. They said, these guys don't even need a commanding officer. You'll have one guy that'll basically just like rush in and throw a grenade into a machine gun nest without even being ordered to. Right? Like, that is what made America the greatest country on earth. And if we want to stay great, we need to get rid of all that social shit, okay? Social Security, cut it. You're not getting your payments anymore? Like, I don't give a shit. It was a scam to begin with. Let's call it a scam. Let's move on. If you feel sorry for somebody for losing their Social Security benefits, give them some money. Make a private donation. Medicare, Medicaid, cut them. the reason that we have the highest cost healthcare in the entire world and some of the lowest health outcomes, like I live in Panama now, and Panama spends 90% less per capita on health and has the same life expectancy as the United States. Okay, like how does that make sense, right? Like you think in a capitalist society that you spend money and you get something for that money, but in healthcare and in education in the United States, because the government has perverted the incentives and perverted the market, it's not like that. You spend more and you get exactly the same fucking thing as the guy who spends nothing, right? So what we need to do is axe those programs. We don't need to become Europe, okay? We don't need to have free hospitals and free education and blah, 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 blah. And by the way, you can only have $3,000 in cash. You can't withdraw more than $3,000 from your bank account. You can't trade with somebody that you've never traded with before. Like we don't want to be Europe. We don't want to have that kind of society. We want to be like gun-toting, whiskey-drinking, like freest people on the planet, the envy of everybody else. That's what we want. And we can't have socialism and that. So we got to choose. And I say we get rid of all the other shit. We close all the foreign bases and we basically go nativist. We go nationalist, okay? And we become the fucking impenetrable fortress island that nobody wants to screw with because they know if they do, okay, that they have millions of people that grew up hunting, fishing, and working in a machine shop that will come kick their asses.
Absolutely love it because, yeah, we need to come back. By the way, I have family in Boquete, so I was just curious. That when you said that, that blew my mind. I was like, oh my God. It's very rare you speak to people who live in Panama. That is for sure.
I even live there. I live in Boquete.
Get the hell out. Oh my God, it's a small world, sir. It's a small world. All right, let's get into this. I did not know you lived in Boquete. That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. No, he is not related to me, folks. Trust me. Calvin and I do not know each other until tonight. This is our first introduction. But maybe one day I'll run into him down there. You'll never know. When we look at the bigger picture, what's happening with what you just talked about, don't you find it disgusting that we're talking about mandated government-managed investment programs to sustain this Ponzi scheme on and on, where eventually it's going to lead to government-mandated retirement programs where instead of investing in equities or precious metals or a mix that the user is tailored to the individual's needs, they're forced to buy a certain percentage of government bonds to keep the Ponzi scheme going. At some point, we have to cut spending. Yet there seems to be no appetite, and there's damn sure no balls in Washington, D.C. to make that happen.
Well, you know what we need is we need fist fights and duels. That's how we fix Congress.
I do miss those days. Reading about them was fantastic. I have to admit that. On the flip side of that, though, is it going to take a gross or massive financial come to Jesus moment to force that issue, in your opinion?
Well, there's that meme about, hard times creating strong men creating good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times, right? Something along those lines.
Yeah, precisely.
So, yeah, I think we're, we kind of just have to go through this cycle, and things are going to have to get harder before people wake up. Things are going to have to get unrecognizable. I mean, I think a lot of things about America really already are unrecognizable, even to somebody who grew up in the 90s. So, I grew up basically in the 90s, early 2000s. I remember sitting in 7th grade and watching I was in science class, and we basically, the whole school stopped teaching. We turned on the TVs and we watched the planes flying the Twin Towers, So that America that existed even then is already gone. Since the Patriot Act, things have changed so much. I mean, the KYC regulation, the banking regulation, all the safety regulations. I mean, we basically became this like fake gay version of the Soviet Union, where everything is just like, you know, becoming socialist nonsense, right? And even the Republicans are socialists. I mean, you know, like most of the rank and file Republicans, they are not willing to touch the holy cows. They are not willing to cut spending. They're not willing to tell people, you know, look, I know you paid into Social Security. I know you're planning on getting these payments and you kind of depend on them, but it's just not very realistic. And we have to stop doing this if we want to survive as a nation, right? Like that's the sort of thing that has to happen. Those are the conversations that need to be had. And, you know, nobody that's in Congress seems to be willing to have those conversations outside of, you know, maybe a few edge cases like Rand Paul and Thomas Massie. But I don't think even Rand Paul and Thomas Massie have, you know, brought up like just throwing Social Security out the window altogether. I mean, the boomers would probably, you know, like crucify you if, like literally crucify you if you wanted to take away their Social Security, right? I mean, they're kind of spoiled children in that regard. Like, you know, the government doesn't take care of me. You know, like all I want is to be free. Okay, all I want is to be free. If somebody robs my house, I want to be able to shoot them without going to prison. If you know, if somebody wrongs me, I want to be able to punch them in the face without going to jail. Right? Like that, to me, that's what freedom is, right? Is you participate in society as a responsible actor who keeps your word and deals honestly, and you expect everybody else to, or there are consequences. It is not, in my view, the role of civilization to subsidize everybody's fucking laziness. And that is what we've become as a country. We subsidize everybody's laziness by stealing from future generations and forcing people to work as slaves.
Well, I'm not offended by your comment because technically I'm a boomer, but I'm on the very tail end of the boomer, quote unquote, realm. Personally speaking, I think that boomers should have the right at age 65 to withdraw from Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid in exchange for no further taxation. But that's me. That's the Thomas Massie libertarian inside of my soul.
Hey, look, if we need to print money to basically give everybody what they put in nominally and say, sorry, you made a bad investment by trusting the system, like, you know, that's what we need to do. All right. But like to continue this insanity, which it's a mathematical certainty that it is going to implode. Okay. There's no way to save Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. It is a mathematical certainty that it is going to implode, and it's going to happen in the next decade. Okay, even you know, look at the CBO forecast, 2032, 2034. That's about as much as you can squeeze out of it, and that's assuming that there's no major economic depression between now and then. That's assuming constant real GDP growth, which is kind of a myth at this point. So, you know, in my view, like, we're already not giving people what they paid into. The net present value of their payments is already far greater than what they're going to get out of it. We're just lying to everybody. Let's at least be honest.
Yeah, I agree with you 110%. Calvin, you hit the nail on the head. We're inflating away their benefits where they're not even practical for everyday use, which is why when I go to my local Publix, I see an 80-year-old woman taking the plastic bags and fluffing them up at the GD register. Nope. You still there, sir?
I'm here.
Okay, I thought but the phone blinked for a minute. It was a typical X glitch. Well, number one, let's wrap this up. But number two, if I'm ever in Boquete, I will have my brother-in-law look you up. We'll hook up and have a cigar and a scotch sometime, or whatever your favorite drink is, and talk about things, because I probably won't be traveling down there for a while. I'm planning to go to Barbados next. But I would love to meet you someday, and we will talk about these things over a good smoke and your drink of choice, sir.
Yeah, and I still come to the U.S. a lot, but when I was 25, I discovered this thing called the Foreign Earned Income Exclusion. And that was basically a way that you can, it's basically a legal way to not pay taxes as an American. Okay, so the moment for me, the moment that I said "fuck this, I'm out," was I was living in Massachusetts and I was forced to pay into this Massachusetts state health care, and my girlfriend at the time was unemployed, and she was going to the Harvard Medical Center, getting the best doctors in the country. And I was taking the train out to the ghetto in Malden with the African immigrants. I was paying $800 a month for my plan. She was paying nothing. Okay, so that when I realized basically what the system was, and that it essentially existed to take from productive people and give to people who weren't productive. That's when I decided I was leaving. And that's not a bad call on the person that I was dating. She happened to be unemployed at the time. But the fact that the system, would just be like, well, yeah, let's charge the young, healthy guy out the nose and then not give him an X-ray when he breaks his hand. And let's give the person that's unemployed, the best healthcare that money can buy, even though she's not paying anything into the system at all. I mean, just like those incentives are so perverse. And the first year that you end up paying, $70,000 in income taxes, you'll start asking those sorts of questions, those really fundamental questions of what is my role in this economy? What kind of value am I getting for this $70,000? I mean, the American revolutionaries, the founding fathers, they were actually willing to risk death because they were getting taxed at 2%. Okay, and now we're just like, oh yeah, I get taxed on my cell phone, I get taxed on my gas, I get taxed on my income, I get taxed if I die, I get taxed if I expatriate. There's a tax for freaking everything, and it's not even it's bad in the United States, but it's not dude, I can't even imagine being European. Can you imagine being French or Spanish and putting up with the kind of shit that they put up with? How do you even wake up every morning and look yourself in the mirror? Those people needed a revolution 50 years ago. So that's kind of my perspective. Is I figured that my Democratic vote was meaningless, so I'd at least vote with my feet and go somewhere that I wouldn't get taxed for breathing and get shitty health insurance in return.
Well, Calvin, that was fantastic. Can't argue with anything you said. Number one, fill in to everybody about marhelm.com, what they can expect from you at your website.
Well, if you're into shipping data, then we publish on a daily basis dry bulk and tanker fixtures, which is basically who's trading with who, which companies are hiring which ships to do which deals. We've got some maps of global trade. You can look up ships on the map. You can see where refineries are, where ports are, etc., where whether they export iron ore or gasoline or whatever. You can get access to our investment community. We do weekly roundups on everything that happened in physical commodity markets, the oil market, dry bulk trade. Basically, it's very maritime focused. And then we also do an annual review where we do stock picks, and the stock picks for Marhelm have had a positive return every year that we've done it. We've had a lot of multi-baggers. We were early on the tanker cycle. The oil tankers had really strong returns for a couple years, hundreds of percent in many cases in a pretty short time period. And now we're kind of looking at most of the picks for this year were in the chemical sector. We picked a couple mining companies, gold mining, platinum mining. I think our top pick is up around 150% this year, but we had several picks that that have performed very well. So it's kind of an investment community. There's some trade data, and then we also do the analysis on what the best investments are and in the upcoming year, and do a post-mortem on what we said the best investments were in the past year and whether or not that worked out or not. So 2024 was kind of a tough year because I was sort of early on some things. Like I was last year I was pitching basically platinum miners, and it took a little bit longer for platinum miners to bottom than I thought it would. But this year, some of those companies are up a couple 100% off the bottom. So that's what Marhelm does. And then I also include all my newsletter posts there, which basically just go over my my personal, sort of buying and selling activity. Right now, I'm allocated mostly to oil companies, platinum miners, some gold mining, and chemicals. I think chemicals are one of the most interest rate sensitive industries out there, and I think as rates come down, they're really going to outperform. The gold and platinum, kind of for obvious monetary reasons, and then platinum had its own sort of idiosyncratic reasons for trading higher. And the oil, I mean, to me, it just doesn't make sense that we're in this world where we get inflation every year. M2 is higher every year. It seems like the price of everything goes up every year, but oil is supposed to be cheaper than it was 20 years ago. It just doesn't make sense to me. I think oil is eventually going to go a lot higher. In the 1970s, when the oil price fixing, basically broke, the gold price fixing broke, the best investments in the world were essentially oil stocks, coal stocks, oil, energy, and gold, chemicals as well. I think that we're probably entering a period where you're going to see similar kind of return profiles. In the 1970s, gold was up, I think, 15% trough to peak, and oil was up 15x trough to peak, and oil was up 20x trough to peak. So, historically, you want energy and metals in inflationary periods. So that's sort of how I'm positioned. I'm also short big cap tech stocks.
Can't blame you. The bubble has to peak before it falls, and I think that big cap tech is hitting the end of the run for Moore's law at this point in time until something new and innovative comes along. Calvin, thank you so much for your time. Follow him at Calvin Froedge on X. For MacroEdge Radio, this is John Galt. Absolutely.
Hey, John, I just want to say I didn't pay for this, and I had no idea what this was going to be about or where this was going to go. So somebody just messaged me and said, "Hey, you want to do a podcast?" And I said, "Sure." So I just want everybody to be aware of that this isn't like I'm not out there trying to sell anything or market anything. Okay. This was like a completely organic thing, and I really am very appreciative to the host, to MacroEdge, and to Real John Galt for having me on and unexpectedly, pumping what I do.
Calvin, you're welcome back anytime, because we didn't even get into logistics in deep, and I'm more of the trucking rail kind of guy. So we have a lot of roads that we can cross together. So next time you come on, we'll talk more about the logistics impact on the world, and we'll talk some metals and mines, because we could talk miners for an hour and it would probably make some people cry. But you were spot on about platinum. You were 110% spot on about platinum. I'm going to give you kudos for that, because platinum is an industrial metal like silver, and the demand for platinum is going to triple at a minimum in the next decade, folks.
Yeah, well, platinum's got a lot of interesting properties. People call it a space metal. But yeah, I'd be happy to come back on, and I know quite a bit about maritime shipping. I'm not as on top of it as I was before, just frankly because the market's been a little bit more boring than it was a few years ago. But I do know quite a bit about maritime shipping companies, and now the basically the international mail system. how to get things from point A to point B, either, whether it's trains, planes, or ships.
Fantastic. Thank you once again, Calvin. Everybody, follow him. Check out marhelm.com. For MacroEdge Radio, this is John Galt speaking. Good night now.